Today, we're jumping into the incredible story of one of the world's most influential religious institutions, the Franciscan Order. It's this massive story that stretches across centuries and continents, but you know what? It all kicks off with one guy and a pretty mysterious message from God.
Francis, go and repair my house, for as you can see, it is falling into ruin. Just picture it. You're praying alone in this rundown country church, and you hear that. Well, that's exactly what happened to a young man named Francis of Assisi more than 800 years ago.
So, the big question is, how on earth did that one kind of cryptic command spark a movement that would totally reshape the church, influence popes and kings, and spread to literally every corner of the globe? That's what we're going to unpack today.
Okay, to really get that journey, let's start with where the order is right now. Because it's not this one single group. Nope, it's a massive global brotherhood with a surprisingly complicated family tree. So the first order, the one Francis founded for men, is actually split into three main independent branches. You've got the Observants, the Capuchins, and the Conventuals. And look at those numbers. Together they're almost 28,000 strong around the world. As we're about to see, the reasons for these splits are absolutely key to the whole Franciscan story. Now, what's really fascinating is the name Francis chose for his followers. Friars Minor, which just means lesser brothers. You got to remember, in 13th century Italy, society was split. You had the maiores, the nobles, the powerful, and then you had the minores, the common folk, the poor, the people nobody paid attention to. So by calling his group the Lesser Brothers, Francis was making this huge radical statement about who they were there to serve, the forgotten people at the bottom. And to really understand that radical idea, we have to zoom right in on the founder himself. The story of the Franciscans is, at its heart, the story of Francis of Assisi's incredible personal transformation. Yeah, Francis wasn't born a saint, not by a long shot. He was the son of a super wealthy cloth merchant, the leader of this rowdy group of rich kids in Assisi. He was all about fancy clothes, throwing money around, and hosting these wild parties. His future looked like it was all mapped out for him. Business, high society, the whole deal. But then war broke out with a rival city. Francis went off to be a knight, but ended up captured and spent a year rotting in a dungeon. That experience, plus a really bad illness that followed, completely changed him. He started to pull away, to spend time praying. And it was in that crumbling old church of San Damiano that the message we talked about at the start began to make sense. The command wasn't just about fixing a building, a physical house. It was about the church itself. So what did he do? Well, at first, he took it literally. One of his biographers said he had the mind of a child, so he just started gathering stones and mortar to physically rebuild the little chapel. But pretty soon, he got the deeper meaning. The house falling into ruin wasn't just this one building. It was the entire church, which had gotten all tangled up in wealth and power and was kind of forgetting about the poor. Of course, this new mission put him on a total collision course with his father. His dad was furious that a son was ditching the family business to become the town weirdo. The whole thing came to a head in this super dramatic scene in the public square. His father dragged him before the bishop to publicly disown him, and Francis, he just happily agreed and said this. And then, he did something absolutely shocking. He stripped off all his expensive clothes, right there, laid them at his father's feet, and just stood there, naked, in front of the whole town. The bishop had to cover him up with his own cloak, but the point was made. Francis had just cut every worldly tie, family, money, status, to embrace a life of total poverty. He actually called it his marriage to Lady Poverty. That single radical act was the spark that lit the fuse. Now let's pan out and see how this one man's choice ignited a massive and eventually very conflicted global movement. The growth was just, well, explosive. I mean, at first, a few friends were drawn to his joyful, simple life. By 1209, he had maybe 12 followers. They all walked to Rome and, amazingly, got a thumbs up from Pope Innocent III, one of the most powerful popes in history. Just 17 years later, when Francis died, there were thousands of these lesser brothers all over Europe, the Holy Land, and even North Africa. It's just wild. But all this rapid growth created a huge problem. At its core was one question. What does poverty actually mean? On one side, you had the zealots, or the spirituals. They insisted on taking it literally. No possessions, period. Friars shouldn't own anything, not as individuals, not as a group. But on the other side, the moderates were saying, hold on, to run missions and universities, a huge global order needs to own property as a group.
For them, the original rule was just totally impractical for an organization this big.
So this fight just simmered and boiled for centuries. People tried to get them back together, but it never worked. Finally, in 1517, Pope Leo X basically said, "All right, enough," and made the split official. He formally divided the order into the conventuals and the observants, who wanted a stricter rule. But then, a reform group inside the observants, who wanted an even more austere life, broke away to form the Capuchins in 1619. And boom, that's how we get the three main branches we have today.
So yeah, despite all this internal division, or maybe even because of it, the Franciscan movement has left this incredible mark on the world. Let's zoom back out and just take a look at that amazing 800-year legacy.
I mean, their influence is everywhere, in every part of society. They've been the official caretakers of holy sites in the Middle East since the 1300s. They were right there at the forefront of exploration, sailing with Columbus to the New World. Their legacy is literally built into the map of America, missions that became cities like San Francisco. And they weren't just builders, they were thinkers, founding universities and producing some of the greatest minds of the time, like the scientist Roger Bacon. It's just incredible.
And today, the total number of friars in those three main branches is still floating around 28,000. 8 centuries after a rich kid from Assisi gave away all his clothes, his lesser brothers are still at work on every single inhabited continent.
Which really brings us to a final thought, right? The story of Francis is one of radical rejection of stuff. He chose poverty in an age when capitalism was just starting to bubble up. So what can we, living in our own age of nonstop consumption and materialism, learn from an 800-year-old movement that was founded on the idea of owning absolutely nothing? It's a pretty challenging question to leave you with. Thanks for tuning in.